Welcome to Uncovering World's Reality, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an update. Why are there not more people talking about the dangerous flashpoint emerging in the South China Sea? The South China Sea is once again at the center of global attention, drawing the eyes of the world to its turbulent waters and the nations that border them. Tensions between China and the Philippines have erupted into open confrontation, with both sides refusing to back down in a contest over sovereignty and control. In a recent and alarming clash, the Chinese Coast Guard used force to block a Philippine supply vessel, escalating what was once a simmering dispute into a dangerous and highly visible standoff. The incident has sent shockwaves through the region, raising fears of further escalation and potential miscalculation. The United States, honoring its long-standing alliance with the Philippines, has responded swiftly by deploying warships to the region. This move has significantly raised the stakes, signaling to China and the world that the U.S. is prepared to defend its interests and those of its allies. For decades, China has claimed nearly the entire South China Sea as its own, drawing a so-called nine-dash line that cuts deep into waters also claimed by its neighbors. These sweeping claims have been rejected by international law, most notably in a 2016 tribunal ruling, but China has continued to assert its dominance. The Philippines and other Southeast Asian nations, including Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, have their own overlapping claims, creating a complex web of disputes that is difficult to untangle. Each country is determined to protect its maritime rights and resources, adding more layers to the ongoing tensions. The latest incident marks a dangerous shift from diplomatic protests and legal challenges to direct physical confrontation. With over a third of global shipping passing through these waters, any conflict here threatens not just regional peace, but also the stability of global trade and the world economy. The U.S. deployment is a clear signal of strong support for the Philippines and a direct challenge to China's growing assertiveness. Joint military exercises and patrols are now more frequent, underscoring the seriousness of the situation and the willingness of allies to stand together. At stake are not just territorial claims, but fundamental principles of sovereignty, freedom of navigation, and the rules-based international order that has governed the seas for decades. The outcome of this standoff could set a precedent for how such disputes are resolved in the future. Each nation involved is now forced to re-evaluate its strategy and alliances as the world watches a high-stakes geopolitical contest unfold in real time. The decisions made in the coming weeks could have lasting consequences for the balance of power in Asia and beyond. The convergence of powerful interests over a handful of remote reefs and shoals has created a flashpoint that could reshape the region's security landscape for years to come. As tensions mount, the world holds its breath, hoping that diplomacy can prevail over confrontation in these contested waters. The crisis ignited on August 15, 2025, near the Second Thomas Shoal, inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. A Philippine supply boat, escorted by its Coast Guard, was delivering essentials to Marines stationed on the grounded BRP Sierra Madre. Chinese Coast Guard ships intercepted the convoy, using water cannons and dangerous maneuvers, injuring crew and damaging the vessel. This was a clear escalation. China's actions crossed a red line, inflicting physical harm to enforce its claims. Manila responded with a strong diplomatic protest, but recognized that action, not just words, was needed. The incident forced the Philippines to call on its most powerful ally for support. The stage was set for a major international response. In Washington, the attack was seen as a direct challenge to the U.S.-led security order in the Indo-Pacific. President Biden ordered the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group to the South China Sea, launching joint patrols with the Philippine Navy. The carrier group, with its advanced aircraft and missile defenses, fundamentally altered the military balance in the region. The Pentagon emphasized the deployment's defensive purpose, upholding international law and honoring the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. The goal was to deter further aggression, not provoke war. Joint patrols now shield Philippine resupply missions and showcase allied cooperation. The sight of U.S. and Philippine ships together sends a powerful message to Beijing. The world is watching this show of force and unity. The U.S. response is anchored in the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty with the Philippines. Recent U.S. statements have clarified that attacks on Philippine forces in the South China Sea trigger American defense commitments. The alliance is reinforced by decades of joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and military modernization support. While the relationship has faced challenges, China's assertiveness has made the alliance indispensable. New agreements allow for a rotational U.S. military presence and pre-positioning of assets in the Philippines. The crisis has made the alliance's value clear to both governments and the public. For Filipino Marines on the front lines, the arrival of U.S. warships is a powerful sign they are not alone. From Beijing's perspective, the South China Sea is not just a body of water, but an integral part of Chinese territory, rooted in its so-called nine-dash line, and claims of historical rights that stretch back centuries. Chinese officials argue that ancient maps and records prove their long-standing presence and authority over these waters, making their claim, in their view, both legitimate and indisputable. China frames its activities in the region as lawful enforcement of its own sovereignty, not as acts of aggression. Patrols by the Chinese Coast Guard and Navy are portrayed as routine measures to protect what they see as their rightful territory. At the same time, Beijing accuses the United States and other outside powers of interfering in regional affairs, claiming that their real aim is to contain China's rise and undermine its security. Chinese state media consistently depict the U.S. military presence as unwelcome and provocative, warning that foreign involvement only complicates matters. They insist that disputes in the South China Sea should be resolved directly between the countries involved, without outside interference, emphasizing the importance of dialogue and negotiation. In 2016, the Hague Tribunal ruled against China's expansive claims, stating they had no legal basis under international law. However, Beijing flatly rejected the decision, dismissing it as irrelevant and maintaining that the tribunal had no authority over its sovereign rights. Control of the South China Sea is central to China's strategic ambitions. The region is a vital artery for global trade, with trillions of dollars worth of goods passing through each year. Securing these sea lanes, along with access to rich fishing grounds and potential oil and gas reserves, is seen as essential for China's economic and military future. To reinforce its claims, China has built massive artificial islands and established military installations on disputed reefs and shoals. These outposts serve as both symbols of sovereignty and strategic assets, allowing China to project power and monitor activity across the region. For Beijing, the presence of U.S. naval power in these waters is seen as a direct challenge to its ambitions and a major obstacle to achieving its goals. The ongoing standoff is a constant reminder of the broader struggle for influence in the Asia-Pacific. Ultimately, the dispute is about far more than territory or resources. It is deeply tied to questions of national identity, pride, and China's vision of its rightful place as a dominant power in the region. With these stakes in mind, China remains resolute, determined not to back down, no matter the pressure from abroad. The U.S. intervention is about defending the rules-based international order, not just supporting an ally. Washington argues that ignoring international law, as China has done, threatens global stability. Freedom of navigation is vital. Over a third of global shipping passes through the South China Sea. The U.S. fears China could one day restrict trade, endangering the world economy. Freedom of navigation operations challenge excessive claims and reinforce that these waters are international. The U.S. also seeks to prevent any single power from dominating the Indo-Pacific. Supporting the Philippines and other partners builds a coalition for a free and open region. U.S. credibility is at stake. Alliances worldwide depend on American resolve. The deployment signals that U.S. security guarantees are backed by real power. Allies and adversaries alike are watching America's next move. The recent U.S. military deployment has sparked a wide range of reactions across the Indo-Pacific region, reflecting the complex web of interests and concerns that define this part of the world. While some nations see opportunity, others see risk, and the overall mood is one of cautious calculation. Countries like Vietnam, for example, quietly welcome a stronger U.S. presence. For them, American involvement serves as a crucial counterweight to China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea, offering a sense of security and diplomatic leverage that would otherwise be hard to achieve. U.S. allies such as Australia and Japan have been more vocal, expressing support for efforts to de-escalate tensions and uphold international law. They see the standoff not as a distant geopolitical drama, but as a direct threat to regional stability and their own national security. For these countries, the situation is urgent and personal, with real implications for their economies, trade routes, and long-term security interests. However, within Southeast Asia, the mood is more cautious. Some ASEAN members, wary of being drawn into a great power rivalry, are urging all sides to show restraint and prioritize dialogue over confrontation. Nations like Malaysia and Indonesia in particular are deeply concerned about being caught in the middle. They fear that escalating tensions could force them to choose sides, something they are keen to avoid in order to protect their own interests and maintain regional autonomy. As a result, ASEAN's unity is being tested. The crisis has exposed internal divisions, with member states struggling to find common ground and present a unified front. The bloc has found it difficult to issue a collective response, leaving individual countries to pursue their own strategies and interests, often at odds with one another. Meanwhile, both Washington and Beijing are actively maneuvering for influence, each seeking to win over regional partners and shape the future of the Indo-Pacific to their advantage. In this fragmented and uncertain landscape, the region's diplomatic balance is more fragile than ever, with every move watched closely by leaders and citizens alike, aware that the stakes have never been higher. The standoff threatens global trade, as any disruption in the South China Sea could spike shipping costs and rattle markets. Companies may reroute ships, raising prices for consumers worldwide. Diplomatically, the crisis is polarizing the region, pushing countries to choose sides and weakening institutions like ASEAN. China risks damaging its reputation as a responsible power, especially among developing nations. Aggressive actions could drive more Southeast Asian countries toward the U.S. security umbrella. For the U.S., the deployment shows resolve but increases the risk of direct conflict with China. A single miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. Both sides must manage the standoff carefully to avoid escalation. As of August 25, 2025, the South China Sea remains a tense standoff, with U.S. and Chinese forces in close proximity. The U.S. deployment has deterred further aggression, but the core dispute is unresolved. China stands firm on its claims, viewing the U.S. presence as illegitimate. The risk of miscalculation remains high and the current calm is fragile. Deterrence must be balanced with diplomacy to prevent escalation. ASEAN and other stakeholders must push for renewed dialogue and a binding code of conduct. The crisis could be a catalyst for long overdue diplomatic progress. The future depends on whether all sides can step back from the brink and choose negotiation over confrontation. Only mutual respect and adherence to international law can ensure lasting peace in the South China Sea.